Next panel, how machine learning impacts application design. I'm going to go drink a huge thing of water now. Thanks.
Have a good one. That Brazilian coffee, strong stuff, I can attest. Really, no, seriously. So to keep you guys all very engaged and hopefully for some great Q&A at the end here. But we're here to talk about two topics. Really the nexus of machine learning and design. We got an amazingly diverse panel here. I'm going to let them do introductions for themselves just because of how deep their experiences are. So if we want to start off with Mars, maybe talk a little bit about, very quickly, sort of your background and maybe one favorite story about the intersections of machine learning and design, but I'm going to keep you to 15 seconds, so I will cut you off. We're going to get used to this.
So I'm Mars. I live in New York. I work for CI&T 20 years already, or almost 20 years, and I'm a physicist by trade. So I used to use machine learning back in 1998 when AI was in the winter, right? So we couldn't really do stuff very quickly. It was very hard. My jobs would be running for months, and now I know, my team is running things in days. So it's a completely different time. I think from the intersection between design and AI, I think the most challenging part is really to integrate the teams. So I have a very diverse team, and when you bring a scientist to talk to a designer and a developer, you're basically putting more fire in a very heated discussion. Right? So it's a challenge to tame that.
I let him go on long. You never cut off a physicist ever, so yeah. Let him go. Yeah, Tova?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tova Blomgren. We had a big discussion on my name here. It's like, is it Tove or Tova? But let's go with Tova. And I am a creative director at Doberman, which is a design firm based in Stockholm and New York. And the favorite machine learning story, I was a teacher at Malmö University like 15 years ago. And I was teaching about, AI and robotics and ubiquitous computing, and it's like now it's finally happening. So it's really exciting.
Thank you.
So my name is Mike Facemeyer. I am a analyst, people that talk about stuff. I'm a computer engineer by trade. I've been building mobile solutions and web solutions for the majority of my career, which is now 17-ish years on the paying side. And before that, I loved machine learning and automation because of Nintendo. Those of you that are my age-ish, when we got Nintendo, there was that thing, the game that you could make and stack things up. Shit never worked. And I've been angry ever since then. And I've been trying to figure out how to do it right. And the cool thing is we finally can. And so I am super, super excited to talk about AI, machine learning, and how we can use that to build great experiences today. That's what I spend most of my job doing is helping companies, helping brands to build really, really cool experiences to make our lives better.
And I think they did the introductions for me, but I'm John Manis, writer at TechCrunch, focusing on early stage companies, machine learning, AI. I'm the ones that have to sort of push back in terms of the frontier ideas that folks are working on, and I absolutely love the pitches that I get, particularly the really zany ones. We get drones that are flying in the sky and dogfighting autonomously using computer vision, and that's the kind of stuff that gets me up in the morning. So low-key stuff for the most part. So I want to start off this conversation with talking about humans, because I think that's the key power behind building all of these experiences. Machine learning, we can't help but have these discussions without using words like learning and training and listening and speaking. And all of these terms come from the human lexicon, the sort of anthropomorphic words that we use to have these discussions. So we'll start off with a couple of questions related to the intersections of people and products, and then hopefully go into a conversation about how those products then circle back and influence people. And if we have some time at the end, we'll do some fun future stuff. That sounds good with everybody. So the first question, I'm going to go to Tova on this, and I really want to talk to you about sort of the anthropomorphism of design and how being human influences the things that we create. Is that always good? Can it be bad? I'll let you sort of take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, we're people, so we try to see like Jesus on a toast or a man in the moon. Like we're always trying to humanize objects. It's just what we do. So of course we're going to humanize, these very personalized experiences as they become more personal and more connected to me. So I think that's just natural. There's no going around that. But I'll have to say I'm not a fan of the whole like creating pretend humans, even with faces and names and like cheeky personalities.
Okay, so the OK Google versus Siri versus Alexa, where do you sort of stand on that debate?
Okay Google for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
But yeah, it's just you set expectations. If you pretend that it's a human, then you're going to go in with expectations that it's going to be as smart as a human, and we're nowhere near that right now. So you're just setting yourself up for frustrated users. But I think like personality, if you do something else, that's something new. Like we had the first Roomba, one of the the vacuum cleaner. And the first versions, they weren't very good. Like, they didn't clean that well. But we loved the robots. It was like our pet, We would go, like, it had a little song at the end, like, do-do-do-do, when it was done. And me and my boyfriend would be like, thank you, Roomba.
The dishwashers do that now, yeah.
Yeah, so those kind of little things that, not trying to emulate the human.
So Mars, when you're building out teams and you think about what's necessary to actually create one of these tools leveraging machine learning, what's necessary of the team to make sure that you have both the human element and also many of the other skills that are necessary, especially as these things silo off?
Yeah, so the silo it's a huge problem because I've been, early on, I tried to put developers and designers to work together, and it's like as someone earlier said here that the designers were freaking out that the developers would come and destroy their beautiful designed screens and interactions, and that's true. It happens a lot. So when you bring scientists, and by scientists I'm talking about data scientists and machine learning experts, it's not the same language. So it's a huge problem to get things done very quickly because one doesn't see the real value of what the other is doing. And also, when you're bringing machine learning models to systems, what you create is a myriad of possibilities, right? So now you're not getting one single interaction. I think there are likelihoods of different interactions. So you have to design for that. It's very important to put them all on the same page about what we're trying to do. We're trying, like Forrester will preach all the time, you're trying to create frictionless experiences. You're trying to make people move from one device to the other without that disruption. And I think machine learning is great for that.
So Mars, how does that change as more and more people teach themselves machine learning, as things like TensorFlow become very ubiquitous? Does that philosophy change, or do you need additional training procedures in place to make sure that those teams are ready for those challenges?
Unfortunately, you do. Like, in my opinion, in order to become a good data scientist or a machine learning expert, you have to have some sort of math intuition, which you don't learn very easily. So it needs to, if you try to learn from scratch now, if you're old like me, it's not going to function well. But I'm a physicist, so that was part of STEM. If you are in the STEM field, you are being trained to have that math intuition. So you're prone to be a great machine learning expert.
Is it always going to be that way? Because,
I don't know.
I'm a developer, and it's funny you mentioned developer and designer. This is the closest that a developer will ever sit to a designer. y'all freak us out. But it used to be that if you were a developer, we had code, we had VI, and that's what kept everybody else away was VI. Because nobody else was ever going to get into that and write code, and then we got WYSIWYG tools, we got drag and drop tools, and it became. And then all of a sudden we had Chris Bosch of the NBA talking about how everybody should write code. So will it get that way with data science and with things like TensorFlow and things like that?
Probably, because the tools are becoming easier and easier to use. Like Google is popularizing TensorFlow, but then you go there to use it and you say, holy cow, it's not easy, right? But I think they are building layers and layers to simplify that. So to mention Google again, Cloud ML is a way to simplify most of the work you do, but still you need to go and build your model. So you need data. And sorry, how many people here are familiar with building a model in machine learning? So I'm assuming there are lots of designers here, right? Which is fine. So a machine learning model is basically, it's a way for you to create a relationship between inputs and outputs. So you train something, I'll call a black box. Maybe you're using a neural net for that, and then you train it and you get an output. That's how you can make a machine learning algorithm recognize a cat in a picture, for instance, right? You have to throw a huge amount of pictures, labeled pictures with cats on it, so that it learns, it configures itself because it's modeled after brain interactions in a very simple way. So you will be able to detect on the other end. So as we evolve those tools, I think it will become easier for a known data scientist to speak the same language, but we are still far ahead. And for you, I don't know, like my designers completely freak out. They say, okay, tell me what I need to design, and I'll design. They don't want to enter the discussion about, what will be the likelihoods of results, when we have the model.
That's actually for us, like that's something that we need to do with every project that we take on. We try to look at like what are the possibilities for machine learning, because like machine learning is not magic. It's not something that's alive and thinking and reasoning. It's algorithms, but we have this amazing tool now, a new tool in our toolbox that's like the most powerful we've had yet. So I think as a designer, you have to use that tool. I mean, it's there if it makes the right thing for the right person. So
I mean, what's the right play? Do you let the users know that they're interacting with a machine learning algorithm on the other end, or do you keep that experience hidden?
No, what I think makes sense is to be transparent with, like you talk about seamless design, but I think when it comes to machine learning, you have to show some of the seams, if that makes sense. Like Kayak does it well for their faircasting. They have a little thing saying like 89% probability that it's like lower now, that you should buy it now.
And how much sort of burden to bear is okay for the consumer on the end, right? I mean, we see some experiences out there where you'll show somebody a list of product recommendations, let's say, and then the system will ask for input and feedback, and it'll say, click on all the ones that were relevant to you, and then you're sort of training the system as time goes on. And so, do you feel like those types of experiences are okay, and how far can that burden extend before folks just go, I'm not going to train this thing, I'm not a teacher, it's not my responsibility?
Yeah, try to avoid it unless you have to, but I think the CAPTCHA example is a really good way to do it. Can you tell that story?
So reCAPTCHA, right? So that thing that prevents us to use bots to, for instance, buy tickets. It started at a very clunky in terms of design. You would present two words, and you would type the two. It knew already the meaning of one, and the other one, you were basically training the algorithm to do OCR very well. It ran like that for years. And then it changed to showing a grid, a picture with a grid, and then you needed to click on, for instance, signs, parts of the picture that represented signs or storefronts or anything, animals. You were training a computer vision algorithm to detect those things. So you were basically everyone here, including me and everyone, we were being used by Google and others to train algorithms, train machine learning. It got so good that at some point it was just a checkbox. I'm not a robot. How can it tell just by clicking on a checkbox? There's even a video of a robot doing there and clicking, right? So it's because it learned the patterns of robots and the speed at which you go to that checkbox and you click on it. So it could detect, it had data to be able to detect that. And then later now, it's in the news now, it completely disappeared. You don't need the checkbox anymore. It has so much data about what is a robot and what isn't that it detects before you need to render anything in front of the user. I think it's a metaphor for design. Yeah. Many people say the best AI is the AI that is completely invisible. Yeah. I don't agree. It will be in certain cases, like the reCAPTCHA one, but in certain cases, you still, we are humans, we are visual, right? We need design that maybe is making transparent that there's AI behind it, maybe not, if you are not a fan of that, but we'll have a hybrid of transparent and non-transparent interactions with
so
AI.
I want to dive into some sort of ecosystem ramifications of that with Mike in a second, but I want to get some thoughts from the audience just because we are so design heavy here today. When you think about AI, raise your hand if to you bots and AI are synonymous.
That's a great question.
Yes.
Okay. That's
very,
good.
very well educated.
We've made serious progress. Raise your hand if conversational assistants, personal assistants, things like Siri are synonymous with AI. A little more. Okay. Interesting. So when you think about the broader ecosystem and just how the general, and I'm not saying this is even representative necessarily of the average consumer, but let's just say that it is. When companies come to you, how do you make sure that you're building experiences for them that both balance the need to be innovative with what consumer perceptions of AI and machine learning are? And those are changing very quickly, as you can see.
I'll say when companies call me, I tend to get that question asked from both of those ends, which is, I need to build a great experience, and unfortunately I get that one less often. These days I get the question of, I need to build a bot. I need to build a chatbot. I want to build some cool machine learning stuff. And please don't ask those questions. I'm a technologist, and I love hearing that question because then I get to jam for like 3 days.
Hey, Mike, I need to build a bot.
Yeah, no. But what we want to do is we want to create these really cool experiences. When this thing came out, everybody's like, oh, that's so cool. This is going to change my life. But the reality is, I now have to be the smart person to put all the apps on this thing. We're getting very, very close to the point where I can lift this up and be like, take me home. Like, I just want to go home. But I can't do that today because Siri is search, and Google Now is search, and Cortana is search. It's just a front end for search. And so we're getting better. We're turning NLP and voice recognition into search terms, and we're changing the language a little bit. But shit, I got down a rabbit hole. Okay, so we want to create great experiences, and so focus on that. And I think what was mentioned here a little bit earlier, which is, should we personalize the computer? Should we personalize the AI? That's actually a really, really important question to understand, because I think the answer is maybe.
Yeah.
There are some situations where it's great. Computers are okay. We all know that computers are around us at all times, and so it's great to interact with them, and great that they can help us. But at other times, it's really awesome that I don't know. Like if I'm sitting here and my flight's at like 6, but I'm flying to Boston today, so
Maybe.
Maybe.
So when this thing just pops up and says, by the way, we've rebooked you somewhere else, that's great AI. I don't care, or great machine learning probably. I don't care how you did it, but the fact that you did it, that's important. I don't need to personify that, but so that's a really, really great question to understand.
So to push back on that a bit, it seems like most of those experiences are driven by the platform. If you think about Apple or Google's role in these ecosystems, they're the ones that have the power to integrate those experiences. So when you talk to brands, how do you build it when you don't have the power?
Yeah, that's a great and it's a great question. So we think about things. We at Forrester think about things from the concept of a moment. You own a moment with your customer, or you want to own that moment. But what's the extent of it that you can own? Because Facebook owns the majority of them. Google and Apple and even Microsoft and Amazon. Amazon's the big one. They own a ton of these experiences, and so you want to slide into that. How can you own a piece of it? So if we fast forward into that future in which I ask my device, or I just say in this ecosystem, I really want to go home. I'm kind of nervous sitting up here, and all these people are looking at me, and it's really freaking me out. If I want to do that, I as Kayak, or I as a hotel company, or I as Delta, I get to own a piece of that experience. So how do we build that today? We need to start building our experiences granular, build them nice and small so they can be composed with other people's experiences, and we need to be able to collect information that helps us know how folks got to us, where they went next, who else's experiences came with us, because right now, like you said, Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon, they are the choreographers today. They own this ecosystem, but that ecosystem is growing into things and locations, and we're going to start to have ecosystems in cars and houses and work and in real life. And so those ecosystems will be defined by us. And that's the amazing thing about where we're going with technology. This ecosystem was very, very big. It was Google and Apple, and then it got cut up a little bit more, and it's going to keep getting cut up a little bit more to the point it's just around us.
Okay, let's talk about the us. I'm going to hold you there, and I want to give Tova the opportunity to talk about that, because when you think about building these tools for many different end users, how do those questions play into your design methodologies?
We at Dogman, we always think about like human first. That's what you do as.
But there's so many. We're all different. There's so many different humans, right?
Yeah, but
We're just a funnel.
I wish it was so very much. We were all just copies of you. We're not there. Maybe 10 years, come back, South by Southwest 2027. Maybe we'll all just be clones. But for now, we're all different.
Yeah,
so how do we deal with that?
I think the personalized experience. It's definitely going there like really fast. And like 5-10 years ago, everybody tried to have you could customize a start page. Do you remember BBC? Like you could get modules and drag and drop them. It was just like the worst way to solve individual like personalization. Like do the work for us. It's like no, you're the experts. You do that work. So I don't think that we should be trying to like make the experiences I don't know, to tailor them to people, but use machine learning and stuff like that to personalize them.
But, well, I mean, how does that play into comfort about AI, right? Because maybe all of us, we all have, Google Now in our room, and, we let X.AI run our email and schedule meetings and all these other things, but I think for the most of the world, like, perceptions might not be what this room is. Most folks might think.
Can we ask that question?
Yeah.
How many people are comfortable with AI, like in the amount of intrusion it has today? Oh, thank God. Now can everybody raise their hand so I can help?
I don't think it's AI per se. It's like privacy, right? Mostly. So you want everything the machine learning can give you or AI can give you, but you don't want to like give out your data and your information for like this big corporation that's going to keep it in a black box and maybe sell it. So I don't think it's necessarily the AI. It's like the privacy issues.
And Mars, I mean, do you have companies that come to you and have those types of questions? And how do you respond to that from sort of a service perspective?
First, I want to make a point about his comment. It's not only the ecosystems who are, basically getting and maintaining the power. It's also data. Whoever has data has power now. Right. So that idea that big data would transform the world finally will come to fruition. Like if you accumulated a huge amount of data, you can do incredible stuff with that if you labeled it. And there's like technical effects on how you're using it, but it's your passport to do something with AI, regardless of what Google, Amazon, Apple is doing. So I just wanted to make that point. That data is the most important thing.
Gotcha. And maybe talk a little bit more about sort of the regardless of what other folks are doing part. Because I get pitches all the time from startup founders. Yeah. And a lot of times when I sit down and I have coffee with folks, I'm talking, and these guys who are brilliant AI, machine learning PhDs come to me and they say, John, I'm really worried. Like I think this is a really awesome product, but I'm worried what happens if Google moves into this space? They have so much more data than me. Facebook understands my customers better than I ever will be able to. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about having data and having that as the passport to compete with these giants, is the answer having different data than what they have? Maybe if you have imaging data, maybe of a certain type of skin disease, like Google's not going to ever have that. So you could train an algorithm quite well and not be competitive. Or maybe in a different world, maybe it's just that your data set's cleaner or that you've isolated the right features. Like what do you say to folks in order for them to be able to use that data to compete?
Yeah, people come to us just like it comes to Tove and Mike. They basically say, we want a chatbot or we want a image recognition, whatever, right? So what we instruct them to do is like to kind of let go of this, you want to be in the hype, and try to build something small. Because when you're trying to build something very narrow, you don't need a huge amount of data. So you can be very effective solving one single problem with less data than you would need in order to build a Siri, right? So try to build, if you're building a smart agent of any sorts and designing around it, try to build something very narrow. So that's what we say first. And then there are cases like a company, they know everything about plants here in the US. I cannot say their name. And they want an app that you take a picture of a plant and it detects the plant, right? So imagine how many imagery of plants you need to collect in order to train that for 300 types of plants. So it's a very hard problem, and we would assume that they have all the imagery. So we say, okay, great, we can create the model. You give us the imagery, we'll train the model. And they say, but there's only one problem. We only have marketing pictures, which are very nicely taken pictures of plants. That doesn't work because the person will take a picture with this, right? So, and the angles will vary, like the zoom will vary. It will be like very hard for the algorithm to know that. So in order to do that, what we did with them was to create a script that would go to Pinterest, would go to Flickr, would consume those imagery, which are free to be consumed, and train the model for them using that. When you put that imagery in your model, you don't own the imagery, you own the model. And Pinterest cannot come after you and say, you used my imagery to train your model. So that's kind of tricky, but it's true.
Gotcha. And so I want to then sort of take this discussion and pivot it to the flip side of the coin, which is not necessarily how people influence products, but then how products influence our behavior. And I think that the natural entry point into that is to go to Mike and to talk about some of these differing geographies. And we think about the idea of building a cross-cultural technology and what it takes to get something to catch on or to be primed. And we were having a nice conversation yesterday about the popularity of voice in China, for example, and how just sort of behaviorally in certain areas, it's less awkward than it is here. And I think for many of us, even if you have AirPods, it's still weird to talk to your phone while walking down the sidewalk in San Francisco. So when you think about building tools for people with differing comfort levels across geographies, and I guess the fundamental question here for the pivot is, can these technologies actually change our behavior and then make us more comfortable to use them?
And do we want to change folks' behavior?
Do we want to?
Or do we actually want you all to be comfortable? Do we want to just deliver you a great experience where it's supposed to be? And that tends to be how I go about that question of, in the past, we just had the web. And so we would just build websites. And we had the portals where I only personalized by adding portlets or these like little widget things. And we did it because that's all we had. That's the only thing we had. And then we had mobile. And so we said, oh, well, we'll just create an app for everything. And then we figured out, well, an app for the right things. And so we got better at that. And now we have this like explosion of things that we can build. And I think it's incredibly important to understand I hate the term users, but I'll use it right here, our users in their journey. Where are they at? What do they need right now? Do they simply need to quickly get on to Facebook Messenger and type something? Or am I by myself in a car or in a kitchen and my hands are dirty or on a steering wheel? It's supposed to be. And would it be better to use voice right then? So I think that and I tell folks this a lot, and it's strange coming from me as a developer, but design is critically important now as we create all these. And not just the design of the UI, but the design of that overall experience in that ecosystem of, in this moment, I'll be on the website. In that moment, I'll go to my phone. In the next moment, I'll get a push notification from my ERP system to tell me to do something. Like all of these things create an experience with a brand or with a product. And I think it's important to understand that.
But we are being primed by technology, right? So everyone here remembers Google Glass, right? So it was one of the first devices that you spoke to.
Yeah.
It was a clunky experience, but you spoke to that thing, and then it went away because it became creepy, and people were freaking out and punch you in the face. I was called glass hole in New York. I was walking like, glass hole! Yeah. But in a way, it primed us for Alexa later, and now for Google Assistant. So I think we are being primed, and our behavior changes. I don't think spectacles from Snap would appear if there wasn't a previous experience with Google Glass. They learned a lot, and they could experiment. I still think it will fail, but it's interesting.
But are we not also being primed by everything else that's going on this week here, by music and by movies?
Absolutely.
I mean, I watch, what was the Disney movie about the little thing that floated around, and at the end everybody was fat and sitting in their pods?
Wall-E.
Yes, that one. Like, are we not, thank you all. Are we not being primed by that and primed by science fiction? Because I look at that and think, wow, we're getting there. We're getting to the point where I don't have to move. I can just ask my Alexa to order me a Domino's pizza.
All right, so let's think about that complacency a bit. So you all are familiar, maybe during the election cycle, the conversation about Facebook newsfeed and Facebook newsfeed bias. Okay, good, most people. And we think about even things like Spotify Discover and how that influences the music that we listen to on a day-to-day basis, right? So I think there's a comfort in being able to just sit back and have our news fed to us, and to just sit back and have our music fed to us, and get that flight and rebooked and all these other things. But from a design perspective, what sort of considerations do we need to make both on the technical side and on the front-end UX side to make sure that folks are both getting the right information and then able to act upon that or recognize those biases? And I think that's a great question for Tova.
I read this Medium article said Silicon Valley has a problem, because those things that you mentioned, like, are they really problems? They're like inconveniences, maybe.
Well, maybe with Spotify, sure. But I think there's, and I'm not taking a side on the Facebook newsfeed debate. I think that we could spend 4 hours here talking about that. But like the broader question here, I think, is important, right?
Yeah. So how we how we become more transparent.
Is it the
towards-
designer's responsibility? Is it the developer's responsibility?
Yeah.
I mean, I think like I said, there's sort of two sides to this. There's how we build our models, and then there's how we let our users interact with those models. Is it the user's responsibility to maybe go into a settings page and sort of evaluate that interaction? Is it should the engineer never build those types of experiences? Should we have some sort of digital constitution or rule set for this? Should there be should it be really easy? I mean, should there be like little sliders and you can just set your bias for the day and what you want to listen to? Maybe you're feeling more you don't want the algorithm in Spotify to send you things that are tailored to you. You want just random, so you can just slide it down to 20%. I mean, is that a design problem? Is it an engineering problem?
I think it's both.
Yeah, and when you said like common framework, this kind of not exactly on topic, but the Asimov principles. We heard of them, like the future of life. Elon Musk and those guys, like 100 AI researchers and thought leaders who came together just last month, I think, and nailed like 23 principles for AI in the future. And there were some like, we can have undirected AI. It should always be for the benefit of humans. One was like, a lethal arms race should be avoided. It's like, okay, that sounds good.
Lessons to take away from this panel.
Yeah.
Tweet that, please. Yeah.
Should be avoided. And there were things about privacy and being able to trace. Like when an AI goes wrong, you have to be able to trace what happened. It can't be a black box. And also about sharing information. So I think we have to start setting those principles and those rules now. This is like the moment before it goes too far in another direction.
Yeah, Mars, I was just going to go for you for that, and then also sort of the conversation around the black box and how we deal with that.
On a less serious note, so if you think about a Pandora or a Spotify playlist, right? So if they keep serving you only the songs you like, probably you'll be satisfied. Most of you probably will be satisfied, just like I am most of the time. But you want to discover new music, right? But you don't want to be jumping to a complete different space where something weird starts playing, right? So there's a gap between discoverability and this consuming what you know is familiar, you like. So in order to fill in this gap, machine learning can be used. You can design the experience where you're being presented new things in a smoother way so that you don't jump to further away and you freak out the user and they say, let me turn off this. I prefer to stick with my own playlist or the things I know. So I think this is something that we'll see more commonly when we design experiences from the design perspective and the coding perspective, trying to fill in the gaps between what is usual and unusual to you.
But I think you could also like almost challenge people to take a leap to do something else. We work with Swedish Radio, which is the biggest like public service radio. And we have this idea of doing recommendations, like people like you listen to this, but people like you hate to listen to this. And then kind of challenge them to
That's fun.
Yeah.
Respond to that.
Yeah, because you don't want to try to make them listen to something they don't like. But if you're transparent about it, maybe something can happen.
But on the black box thing that you mentioned, it is like neural nets today are black boxes. So when you're training a model, you're basically throwing a huge amount of data from one side, configuring it, like number of neurons you're using, number of layers, and a bunch of other things, and then you get results. If the results are bad, you cannot understand why they're bad. You need to go back, bring that bad data back in, and run experiments, most of them offline, so that you basically, it's a time-consuming effort to tweak without knowing what is happening inside. It's brute force, basically. And this is disappointing because when you think about machine learning in the common sense, what people are saying is like, oh, machines are learning by themselves, and they're not.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. When it comes to building experiences that include AI and include machine learning, we have to understand that it's not magic, and B, you've got to learn both sides. You've got to learn what a successful experience looks like, and you also have to teach it what an unsuccessful experience looks like. You have to teach it like this was bad. So don't levy that on your users. Don't levy that. I spend way too much time these days talking about chatbots and Facebook Messenger bots and WeChat. And when folks say, we're going to build this bot, And as Mars was saying earlier, they instead of building the simple, they try to solve way too many things. They say, we're going to throw AI at it, and it's going to do this cool thing and that cool thing. And every time I say, okay, one by one, what's the bad side of that first cool thing? And what's the bad side of that second cool thing? Because that'll happen. And we have to have that to happen for you to understand, or for the machine to understand, this is what it's supposed to do. So how do we create bad experiences without delivering them to our users? That's incredibly important.
That's good. And also, like, how you optimize as a designer, right? So the single most important thing for a designer to have a good conversation with a data scientist is to ask them, what are the signals that I have to build in my interface to give it to you so that the machine learning model is optimized? Because if you put so many things there that are ambiguous, it will train badly. So that's why you have thumbs up and thumbs down. But Facebook went far to, only had the thumbs up. That was a problem for them. Because you cannot train the algorithm about you're angry, you're sad, right? So that's why they put those buttons there, because now you can explicitly tell. And with that, they get that information input in their system, and they are learning. Like when you're sad, what makes you sad, right? So it's very important to have information flowing from the interface to your data scientist so that the models are better built.
Okay, so I think we'll spend the last, I think we have like 10-ish minutes here before the Q&A, so I want to sort of transition into the conversation about the future. And I think a good transition point there, Tova, is to talk a little bit about sort of this idea of the nudge and changing behavior. And I know you all worked on a particularly interesting implementation of this that I'd like to draw a little bit of attention to. So maybe sort of go from there.
Yeah, we tried. It was actually our tech team who wanted to do something on machine learning and voice, just to try it. And they decided that there's a problem in meeting rooms where the big decisions are made, that women are speaking less than men, getting less attention than men. And even in school classes, if a girl takes up more than 33%, then everyone thinks the girls are taking over. So there is a problem. So we built this app that you can use in a meeting and put on the table, and then it will measure like how much the women are speaking versus the men. And you get like a little statistic, and you can see like how it went.
Gender EQ. Right?
Gender EQ is the name. And we did it as a small, just like an experiment. Of course, it's not going to solve the issue, but it can shed some light on it, and it can start the conversation about it. And I think there are some great ways to like nudge like that with machine learning. There's this this guy from Stanford, like a 17-year-old. He just built a chatbot that will help refugees apply for asylum. So you just basically answer questions, and it's translating it to Arabic. And then it will fill out all the forms. It will create which is really hard for someone who might even be illiterate to do. So that's like really cool examples. But then on the other side, you have the fact that Trump might be president because of machine learning, which is kind of scary, because he was working with Cambridge Analytica. Do you know this guy's really shady, scary company who's been like targeting profiling. Like they claim to have profiled everyone in the US based on data that they bought. Like all your data is for sale, just so you know. And they look at Facebook, and they're able to target precisely who you are. And they're not going for demographics, but they're going for personality traits. So what's your openness like? How neurotic are you? Stuff like that. And can pinpoint like these messages directly to different types of people. And some think they swayed the election, and they were involved in Brexit too. So big responsibility there.
So Mike, let's talk about that as it plays into sort of forward-facing technologies. And you have to definitely be on the forefront of reading about and experimenting with different technologies. We see APIs for object recognition and video. And I feel like while this is sort of nascent at this time, like probably a year from now, it'll be just ubiquitous across the industry. And so when you think about building these experiences for your users, and you think about a lot of what Tova just talked about with respect to privacy and data and so on and so forth, I mean, what is sort of the limit of, let's say object recognition and video. Let's say every time you upload a video to Facebook, they can go ahead and analyze it, look at the objects in it, and then they can either sell that data or use it for advertisers, and then recommend you, your table's ugly. They've just made that distinction now, and they're going to recommend you a new table, because it was in your video from your birthday party. Like, how much can advertisers take advantage of this?
a lot, all of. It's funny, I'm actually doing a speech here in the beginning of April in New York City, if anybody's around, on the future of marketing and how marketing happens. And if you think about your house, you think about all the connected things in your house, whether you have an Amazon Echo or a Nest, or all these things that always know what's going on, where you're walking, what you're doing. Do you have cats? Do you have kids? What are your kids complaining about? What do your kids make some offhanded comment like, man, I sure would like some Power Rangers for Christmas. All of a sudden, you're getting ads for Power Rangers, and that's funny. How does that work? And so the answer is it's damn near unlimited. We are literally an API call away of getting all that. You know, I can go to AWS and was it the recognition API and do video recognition and.
But you can do your age now, by the way, if you want just a fun example of that. If you go up, you can upload a photo, like your profile picture, and it'll try to guess how old you are.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I know, it says I'm 24 every time. I don't know why. I'm like, damn, thank you. But it's literally one API away. And it used to be that as a marketer or as a line of business leader, you would have to go to your developer and say, hey, I have an idea, can you build this? And we'd be like, yeah, of course. But I'll do it when I want to do it. But now the tools are there, and these APIs are incredibly consumable. They literally are like putting Legos together to build a solution to do that. And so, if you have an idea, it's probably not that far away. I mean, you all get to do it every day. So
I'm interested to hear your perspective, particularly as this ties into hardware, right? I mean, you think about sort of AI-enabled hardware, and if these are the algorithms that are running in the back end, what does the future of that hardware look like? And I think even a second thing to ask on top of that is sort of the idea of the platforms themselves. And we talked about this too, like the sort of the AI first smartphone or whatever the Pixel is being marketed as. Like, is it really AI first? Like, does it help Mike do his job? Does it help users? What does sort of the 5-year vision there look like?
Yeah, I have the Pixel phone, and it's sold as the AI first smartphone, right? It's definitely not, right? It just have a shortcut to an assistant there. I think what I liked most that I saw, unfortunately, was killed. The project Pebble Core, very small gadget that you could clip on you. It had Spotify, so music. And GPS, that's all you need when you're running, music and GPS, right? And coaching. So it was highly specialized, but for me, it was like the best use of AI. It could provide you, while you're running, I'm a runner, by the way, so you're running, it could provide you insights about, how you could change your form, that type of stuff. It was a great vision. It got killed, right? Fitbit bought Pebble, and the project was killed. I think we need to evolve to something like that. Like, this idea of having thousands of apps, like how many apps you actually use in your phone today? Like you install and then,
right?
Yeah. So, in the future, maybe companies and services will just build services that plug into the platform, and the platform it doesn't need to be only voice activated, but it's basically, you want to solve your problems. You want to buy a ticket. You want to check your flight, that type of stuff. And you don't need an app for that. So I think we're gradually moving towards that vision, but still there's a pushback that apps are the things you have to build, right? Apps that you see physically in front of you, you have to install them.
Does that lead us to democratization? I mean, do things become easier to build because you don't need these huge experiences? You can just have a small little widget?
Yes, because then you are indirectly, you're accessing the data from the ecosystem, right? So if well built, you basically have a way to tackle that data without, because when you build your app, you have to get the data that powers your app. If you're plugging yourself into an ecosystem, just like it happens with the Facebook Messenger, right? So you're basically tackling their ecosystem, but also you're delivering power to them, to Facebook, to Google. So you have to think about a trade-off.
So, Mike, you look like you got a lot to say about this.
Oh, I can talk about this for days. Build smaller things. Build smaller things. And understand that you lose control. But if you build the best part of the experience, you don't have to have the best AI. You don't have to have the best stuff. Build the best experience for what you do, and all of a sudden it will start to join up. Kind of like when I was in 8th grade or something, and they showed you all the atoms that would come together.
He's 24, so that was just like
just months ago.
But these experiences will eventually start to come together to solve that problem. I don't want any more apps ever, like never. And I believe that we are the last generation to understand what a web browser is. to actually like open up a web browser and type a URL, like that. Crazy. That's going to be so arcane. We have these things, web components, and web components can actually be just software as the standard goes today, or it also can include hardware, and I can actually start clicking things together and putting things together, whether it's an Ada
What does that mean to design?
Yeah, I'd love to know this.
I would love to know that.
Put her on the spot.
No, it's actually, we have a project now working with smart homes for Sweden's biggest telco company. And the UX designer and the visual designer, we actually had like a crisis meeting almost last week because they're so bored. They're like, we don't have anything to do because there's like no interface. There's a lot of just glue between different things. And things happen while you're away, so they can lock your door for you when you leave the house and stuff like that. They're like, but we want to design. And for them, designing is still kind of doing the interface. So we have to
So here's
change our thinking.
I want to ask either of you, but sort of depending on your take. I mean, could it be the flip side? Could it be that the web browser is the only interface? I mean, if everything's, I look at my phone now, and the other day I think I just didn't have LTE or access to the internet. I was like, I was on a plane, and I was looking through, and I was like, there's literally nothing I can do on this phone. Like, it's completely useless to me. So, like, is the sort of flip side of that? Is it almost like a reinvention of the Chromebook, where you have the OS is a browser, and everything just clips into that?
Yeah. So this is a big year for the web. Flat out, we have web components and we have service workers for all the developers in here. Service workers will allow us to build offline experiences with the web.
Progressive web.
Yeah, progressive web apps is what comes out of this, PWAs. And so once we have those, then all of a sudden, what looks like an app on my phone, one of these little square things, becomes just the web, and it'll work offline. And so at that point, we will rarely ever open up a web browser. Now that being said, discoverability is best done on the web. If you want folks to discover what you can do, what your services are, they will still type in a search. It's just the search won't be in a web browser. It'll be in Siri or Cortana or Google Home or Google Advisor Assistant, whatever they want to call it today. And that search will compose these small things together. It will compose a little bit of web component. It'll compose a little bit of what Google calls instant apps, which is like slivers or atoms of your app. Because I don't ever want to open an app, ever. I just want to solve a problem. That's it.
All right, so I'm going to give the last question before we go to Q&A to Tova. And I want to talk a little bit sort of the final phase of this democratization, right? And I don't know how many of you are familiar with sort of the IFTTT model of being able to just sort of drag in one task and build a command, and you don't need any programming knowledge at all. It's just sort of basic, this is the input, this is the output, and I can sort of drag and drop. So when you think about machine learning, is this the future of it? I mean, from a design perspective, will folks be able to just, I'm going to drag and drop, this is an object classifier, I'm going to build a security camera that's going to tell me every time a red pickup truck drives by, and that's it. And there's, you don't have to worry about the data scientist, you don't really need to worry about the designers, because, you do it from sort of the macro side, but the individual doesn't have to worry about designing those experiences. And Mars, feel free to jump in there as well, but do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, designers and developers are going to change the things that you do. Like now you have Squarespace, you're not building websites the way we used to 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that's going to happen with machine learning too.
How long? I'm going to make you commit to that. How long?
Ooh.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think you're better suited to answer that. I can.
2 years.
2 years?
2?
It's ambitious.
Really?
Give it or take.
But the thing is, we're always
We're
gonna
technologists.
we're always gonna want to tweak and develop and change those things. So once you have that kind of drag and drop machine learning thing, then you're gonna be like, but I actually want to change the algorithm a little bit. I'm gonna do something. So you're gonna just move further, into specialization, I think. But I can easily see a sketch plugin with machine learning that can do little things for you while you're designing.
Got it. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I think we have a lot of questions that were already submitted that I have, but I'm also happy to jump out into the audience, sort of as necessary here. So let's see if this interface works. So the number one most upvoted question on here, it's changed since I last looked at this. So what comes first, the AI or the design?
Great question.
Anybody. It's open for anybody.
This,
yeah.
for the Gender EQ app, it it was the machine learning because they wanted to do an experiment. And I think we changed, at Doberman, we changed like just the last few years to talk about tech as a driver, not just tech as an enabler. That like at IBM, when the people came to you and like, build this, that's not how we can work anymore. You have to have kind of design and tech at the same level, just the sweet lovemaking.
Yeah, but I would say, again, as a designer, comes first people, the interaction,
first,
right?
yeah,
And then you think
sure.
about design, and then if the designer has in mind that he or she can really contribute to a machine learning model that will help, this is the perfect arena, right? You're basically understanding that those apps are going to give us different answers, as opposed to just one answer for one question.
Next question is, and this is definitely a Mars question, how do you train a machine to identify malicious and false data? In 30 seconds.
Malicious data? Well, you train a machine by basically giving examples, right? Just like a child learns, you need to show this is malicious, right? And so you have to gather what we call labeled data, a lot of them. But it's not easy because if you think about malicious code, for instance, it's very hard to detect a malicious code because it depends on the effects that will trickle down from that. It's a very complex
For 30 seconds, that was pretty
question.
good.
Yeah.
I think we got a question from the audience.
Yeah, you already talked about that AI and machine learning can only do good. And my question is, do you think about the ethics of machine learning and what are your personal moral limits? What would you do and would not do? Where's your limit when you are designing and developing solutions?
Well, we said that it probably elected Trump, so not all good, right?
Ask that question every time.
Yeah.
Every time you build something, ask that
Yeah.
question. So I'm a technologist. Full disclosure, I also believe in the matrix, like truly believe in it. But we are humans, and we all got to get along. And we as technologists tend to be on the forefront of all the things that we use to interact with each other, whether it's an interaction that kind of displaces us from each other or draws us together. So my answer is always ask that question because it changes for all of us.
And yeah. Okay.
I think the way you worded that was good. I often get
Yeah.
the question at panels where people will say like, when is the end of the world coming from AI, or who's going to hold the master keys in 5 years when AI has all the power to take over the world, and like I think those questions can be okay, but if we really have to sort of be grounded in what the capabilities of machine learning are today.
Yeah.
And I think by asking sort of the ethics component of that, like on point.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I thought maybe off topic, but I think looking at AI as something that's not going to replace us, but it's going to help us become smarter, like augmented intelligence. And like Watson, for example, is very clearly stated as a partnership between humans and technology. And they're supposed to make us smarter, not replace us. So that's another component that I think is really important. I don't know if it's
and I said this to Mars yesterday when we were talking, which was every sort of century that we go about and there's big technological change, we try to explain how the mind works with sort of the technology of the day. So you look back in literature, there's actually explanations of, well, there's just steams and pressures, and that's how the brain works. Or there's these little gears at the atomic level, and that's how the brain works. And so now we're at this point where it's it's all electricity and everything's computers in the brain are synonymous. And it might be. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a machine learning PhD, but I think it's important that we still be grounded in understanding that while it might be 2 years before we can have a drag and drop interface for an image classifier for the plants, or maybe even today for your plants, like we're a ways off. There's some very serious scientific barriers between that and true generalized artificial intelligence.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Be good to each other.
Yeah. So yeah, focus on us first. That's like a good starting point. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for an awesome panel firsthand. There's a lot of conversation. The conversation flows mainly about what AI can do for us, right? So we introduce data to the AI system, we get something back. But I'm interested in if you have a point of view of AI actually being the facilitator between human interaction. So not AI giving me a very qualified answer, but actually connecting me to someone who's an expert and can give me an answer. So more a connector than a service machine.
Yeah, I think that's on the same topic of thinking of AI as a way to improve us as humans and to create that partnership. So I think, and it's super interesting to think about AI as someone who can help advise like politicians or our governments and make us become a little bit smarter. So I think any way that AI can be a partner more than a replacement is.
Who here saw the Soul Machines talk at South by? Bunch of people. Were you freaked out to see that baby simulated? Right? It was amazing and frightening. But it was, I think, yes.
Yeah.
But in a sense, I think they're pushing a question in our minds, like, do we need human-like interactions? Because their thesis is that you do. Like, it's the only way to create empathy. But as designers, we'll have other ways to build empathy, right? The discourse, if you're texting with a robot. But to the question, to answer to the question, I think empathy is important to make connections. So you don't say like, hey, we should meet. We'll be great together. That doesn't work. Like, you know, there needs to be some sort of empathy.
It's not always just transactional utility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think machine learning will have a role in that, like creating the empathy between entities, people, machine to machine.
Yeah. There's some awesome companies doing that kind of work too. Like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with like Affectiva or you know, some of the work that's being done around being able to analyze text and say, you know, this person is showing early signs of dementia, for example, or this person you know, might be on a track suffering from depression or something like that, and being able to facilitate the connection passively or actively between that person and the person who can help them with that. I think there's a lot of room for natural language processing and AI there.
Absolutely.
And super quick plug, Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil. You want to know like how this progresses? Amazing.
Hi, I've been a principal designer on 2 consumer-facing platforms based on natural language processing, machine learning, and AI. And what was fun and interesting was that we started out with the consumer design, because that's what's fun and that's what's interesting. But then as a result, I ended up having to design an entire platform for the trainers. What would that look like as people sit in front, and what are the tags? And then the tags ended up, we had to create, well, what's the ontology or the taxonomy? So then I had to design an interface for all of that. And so it was really interesting to see how the human army, as you will, you know, help to that question early on, like how much is on the user versus not, and what's not on the user, we actually have to train. So it's interesting. I think there's an opportunity, you know, this year and the coming years for designers to, as you know, both of these are, you know, living in one app, right? They're across different platforms.
Beautiful example. Beautiful. Like, we'll have this challenge.
Yeah, I was curious how much, so the question, that's the comment to set it up, but the question is how much is taxonomy and ontology, like how vital is that to this? And do you see more and more of that being built out to these problems that we're trying to solve?
I think it's vital, depending on the problem you're solving, depending on the model that you're building, it can be critical, right? If you're looking for semantics in text, for instance, in contracts, you want to see if the contract is fair, it's being executed correctly. So you need to have a deep understanding about the semantics, and you need that classification of you know, terms. But I like what you mentioned about, you know, you as a designer building the interfaces for people training the model, or basically providing data. I think that's critical, and I think designers should be interested about that, because there will be a lot of work to be done in that sense. In, you know, as someone training the algorithm, I don't want a crappy interface, just like you as a human being don't want a crappy interface, right? You don't even want the apps anymore. Right?
And I think that's a particularly interesting question too, in terms of, do folks who are training even know that they're training, right? And we talked about this a bit with respect to the consumer when you upvote or downvote something, but I've seen a lot of implementations lately by startups where folks are optimizing between like a Mechanical Turk, a human, and then an AI, right? And the person who's, you know, doing these micro tasks from like an M-Turk perspective might not even know what they're doing, right? Or have a lot of context behind that. And so I think when you're building these interfaces, that's critically, like I completely agree with Mars, like they're critically important questions to ask.
Yeah. The core problem that we have is that of language. And computers speak one language, and we as humans speak another language. And so how do we do that transition? And for a long time, that was code. That was C and C++ and Java. But the reality is C and C++ and Java was written for us as humans to understand. There still needs to be that translation. So when it comes to schematics, schema of language and schema of data, incredibly important. It's not going to go away. It will be even more important as we go forward.
Thanks so much for the great panel.
Yeah.
Through line of a lot of the panels I've been listening to is this reflection on the part of engineers and designers, or what do we do, why do we do what we do? The theme of ethical design has come up more than once. I'm hearing it here today.
Yeah.
But what I hear missing, or what I'm not hearing in this conversation, is the larger kind of the water that we're swimming in of the business models that pay our salaries to make the things that we then have to decide whether ethically we're okay with, right? There's this vision of like the designer who will stand in front of the tank and say no to creepy things. But that's not really realistic because these things go unquestioned. The question of like, just how you detect what music you want to listen to. Is that even the right problem to be solving? Should we be doing bigger or better things? Is sort of absent from the discussion. It's not a criticism of this panel, but it's something that I think affects our work, but that we don't talk about nearly enough. And I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, money is the enabler to do. That's when we talk about like profit at Doberman, where like all the employees own the company, so we don't have to pay money to an owner. So we think of money as an enabler to be able to do design that improves people's lives. And of course, we're working with commercial clients. So that's, I mean, without the money, you can't do anything.
I think there's two key questions. There's like to sort of separate that conversation into two parts. You have to think about sort of the power of where innovation's being created. And if you think about the sort of Silicon Valley or tech or venture capital ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, and the power laws that are present there, I think there's a ton of forces in terms of what gets created, what gets funded, what scales, so on and so forth. And we could be here all day talking about that. And then the second thing then is the diffusion of that technology, and we talked about that a bit. Or at least Mike and I talked about that a bit in terms of how that technology then gets adopted by larger companies. And then there's even now a third leg of that discussion now, which is as these companies become more and more tech forward, and you see non-traditional companies acquiring tech companies, Ford and folks that you wouldn't have traditionally thought of buying these software companies. Now they themselves are having to deal with sort of what do we fund, what scales, what can we absorb easily into our processes. And so I think that to truly address that, and then part of that, maybe that's why we haven't addressed it, is that to address it, you have to hit all of those points. You have to hit what diffuses and why, what gets funded and why, what scales and why. And I don't know if you guys have perspectives on that from the corporate side, but definitely when you look at venture and you look at what types of projects get funded and scale, there's a lot to unpack there.
But we also try to really encourage our clients to start thinking differently about what KPIs we're measuring, like the time well spent, to not try to just steal time from the user or attention from the user, but actually create a meaningful experience, like be super precise or be quiet. So I mean, we can actually help companies think about like what's profitable. I think it's a great experience. I don't think it's about trying to steal time or attention from users.
I don't know if it answers your question, but I think it's also the power is in our hands. We are the users. We are the consumers of such systems. So if we react positively for the ones doing good and negatively, just like the pushback that Uber is receiving now, right? It's a fair pushback. They did many bad things, man, right? So, and they used machine learning for that as well. So they basically getting away with murder, basically, right?
Uber is a great example. What happens with Uber over the next 6 months will be incredibly telling to that exact point.
So it depends on
how
us.
cool are we as a society with with getting great technology delivered in a shitty means.
We're done? Okay.
Thank you
all
so much.
so much.
Thank you.
Great. Awesome.